Hi guys, welcome to our second lesson in our World War One local study, looking into researching soldiers from the local area who we know have their names on the school buses. So this is continuing from last lesson. That's why it's really important that you watch and do the work for the first lesson first. Don't just jump straight into this one without having done the first lesson, otherwise it's not going to make any sense. There's also some resources today that if you can print off or have loaded up, that'd be really good. It's not the end of the world if not. Don't worry about it too much. It's just going to save you a bit of time. Essentially, it's just a table that we're going to be working from. But if you can't get it up, that's absolutely fine. So, thinking about last lesson then, I want you to do this starter task. We've got a picture on the left here, and it's a photograph from World War One of men who belong to the same regiment. Now, we've got 3 questions here going from challenge to extra challenge to mega challenge. If you're going to do mega challenge, I want you to do all 3. Extra challenge, you're going to do the first 2, and then challenge, you're just doing that first question. So we've got, what do you think the men in the picture were a part of? Again, thinking about last lesson. Then what source could be used to cross-reference this claim that you've got? So thinking about that answer to the first question, what other source apart from this photograph could you use to check if you're right? And then the mega challenge is to think about how useful the picture is for an inquiry into one of the soldiers' lives. So how useful is the picture for finding out about that soldier's life? I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that now, guys. So if you pause the video here and take 5 minutes to answer those questions. Okay, guys, so you should have taken 5 minutes now to answer those questions, and I'm going to go over the answers for you now. So, challenge task. First of all, what do you think the men in the picture were a part of? Thinking about last lesson. Well, last lesson, right at the end, if you remember, we learned about men who signed up and served together from similar places. Especially, we were looking at men from Purfleet and Essex in particular. And we can see that, you know, they're laughing and joking around and everything like that. So the likelihood is that these men are friends and that they've signed up together. That's what we can take as an inference. Obviously, it could just be that they became friends in the army. But thinking about POWs battalions, we could probably take the inference here that they were part of a POWs battalion. They signed up together. So extra challenge, how can we cross-reference that? Just as I said, because we're not exactly 100% sure. It's really, really important in history that we cross-reference. So that's using multiple sources, guys. So you can never make a historical judgment or claim using one source. You always need different sources of information. Like imagine if there was a fight at school, I would never believe one student, right? A teacher's never going to believe one student. Because they might be lying, they might be unreliable, or they might be telling the truth, they just need a bit of backup. So you've always got to use multiple sources and check them against each other. So what source could we use to cross-reference the picture to find out if it's true? Well, we could use, we were talking about last session, census information. Now, if we have census information on these men, it would tell us the birthplace. If we can work out the birthplace or where they were living before the war, we could work out if they signed up together from a similar village. Even more precisely, if we found out military records that gave us our service numbers. If you remember from last lesson, if they've got very similar service numbers, it could mean that they signed up together, because obviously they were issued their service numbers. If they're signing up together, they're going to be one after another. So that's how we can cross-reference the sources there to find out if these men are in fact part of a POWs battalion or signed up together. Now, the mega challenge, how useful is the picture for an inquiry into one of these soldiers' lives? You can say multiple things about this. Remember that every source in history is useful in some sort of way. If I present it to you in a question or something like that, it's going to be useful. You can always find some sort of use out of it, but usefulness really depends on the question. So you have to think, how useful is this picture for an inquiry into one of the soldiers' lives? That's your question. Okay, into one of the soldiers' lives. Now, the photograph on its own might not be that useful. It doesn't really give us a lot of information. But coming back to that previous thing, if we can cross-reference it and check it, then it could be very useful for, you know, telling us about who they served with and maybe who they were friends with in the army. But as it stands, you could say, as we have limited information on the photograph, it might not be that useful for giving us a lot of information for an inquiry into one of the soldiers' lives. But again, that's your own personal opinion there. Okay, so on to today's lesson. We're looking at who were the Purfleet pals, and we've got the ensign buses here. This is some of them that were used in World War One. So last lesson, as I said, we were looking at what information you need to write a biography of a soldier. So last lesson, we were identifying those questions, those sources that we'd need. And this lesson, we're going to actually be looking at the sources, putting that information together before we plan and write our biography. So our learning objectives today are to make inferences from sources to find out about a soldier from the local area. Just as a reminder, an inference is that ultimate sort of skill, that really essential skill for a historian looking at evidence. And inferences means looking beyond the obvious, right? Looking beyond the obvious context of a source, using your own knowledge and kind of being an investigator to work out what the meaning of the source could be. So I give this example a lot. So if you wake up and you see that there's puddles outside, but you can't see that it's raining, could you still infer that it was raining recently? Yes, you're reading between the lines. Your knowledge tells you that if there's puddles, it probably meant that it rained, right? Well, it means that it definitely rained. So you're inferring from the evidence, from the source that you have of a puddle, that it rained last night or rained recently. So that's what an inference is. And when we're particularly looking at the sources today, it's making judgments from the sources that you can see about these men when you might not have the whole picture. But using your knowledge, you're drawing out judgments from the sources. Okay, so cross-referencing, coming on to that as well, cross-referencing sources with other sources and own knowledge. Like I was saying, historical claims need to be made using multiple sources. You can never make a claim using one source. So that's a really important skill, especially because, you know, this is about remembrance, honouring those men who gave their ultimate sacrifice. We need to make sure we're getting it exactly right when we write our biography, to be respectful and truthful to the history. And then the third one is explain with confidence how you can research a soldier from the local area. So at the end of the lesson, we sort of looked at this at the end of last lesson, but now with confidence, I want you to be able to, at the end of this lesson, be able to say, you know, exactly how to research a soldier from your local area. Okay, so we obviously decided at the end of the last lesson, a good place to start is a war memorial to give us names here. So I've just listed this one here. This is the Purfleet War Memorial right near Purfleet Station. I'm sure, you know, all of you know where this is and would have walked past it at some point. And we can see that it's made in grateful remembrance of the men of Purfleet who fell in the Great War, 1914 to 1918, which is the First World War. So these are some of the names, well, these are all of the names on the memorial, rather, of all the different men that unfortunately died in the First World War. Okay, so a good place to start then, we have the names, but we want to find out some more information here. And I sort of alluded to this at the start of the lesson with the regiment numbers, but a good place to start is finding out those regiment numbers. Every single soldier would have a unique number that's assigned to them, and that's going to give us a lot of information that we can then use to research other sources. So I went down to the local heritage centre before all this coronavirus stuff and got some military records, and I've just written that up for you here. So this is the military records that I have from Purfleet Heritage Centre, and this isn't every single man that died during World War One, but it's the majority of them here. And I've got their last name, their first name, their service number, and the regiment that they served in. So I've got all of this information that I've written up for you. And now what I want you to do is we're going to decide together what men we're going to focus on. And to do that, we need to find some men that were that knew each other, or that had sort of similar birthplaces, similar experiences in the war. Okay, so what I want you to do now, guys, is the first thing you've got to do is read through all of the information. Then the next step, you're going to underline any similarities you see in the data. So remember what I was saying at the start of this lesson about service numbers and regiment numbers and what that can mean. More obviously, you could look at their names, see if any of the names are similar, especially, well, just the last names really. That might tell you that they're family. That's an inference that you're drawing there. So I want you to do that, okay, guys? So step one, you're going to read through the information. Step two, you're going to underline any similarities, so just underline it here. Or you might just want to write it down in a list. And number three, you're going to make inferences about those similarities. So like I was saying, you're going to identify those similarities, but then what does that mean? So you've identified that, that's great, but what does that actually tell you? And if you're stuck and need some help, use the next slide. So have a go at this first, guys. If you get a bit stuck and need some extra help, I'm going to go on to the next slide in about 10 seconds time. But for everyone else, I just want you to take 5 minutes and do that now using those 3 steps. So pause the video here. Okay, guys, so if you need a bit of help and you're struggling a bit here, I'm going to go on to the next slide. And this is the same task, exactly the same task, but I've just given you a bit of help here. So instead of getting you to underline it yourselves, I've underlined 5 different men here. Step 2, let me see, what could you infer the 2 Watkins are to each other? So I've identified Watkins, Harry Herbert Watkins and William Campbell Watkins. What inference could you make about their relationship with each other? And then look at George Newton, Reuben Beaumont and Archibald Satch, who I underlined here. They have similar service numbers and served in the same regiment. So what could we infer they were part of? Again, thinking about the starter, thinking about last lesson. And again, I just want you to take 5 minutes there to answer those 2 questions, step 2 and step 3. Okay, guys, so everyone should have done that task now. I've highlighted then some men that I want you guys to look at that you all should have identified already. So you might have identified Harry Herbert Watkins and William Campbell Watkins. And what's the inference we can make there? They were family, right? We can infer that because they've got similar last names, they were probably related. Maybe we don't have their birthdays. They could be father, son, brother, etc. Well, I can reveal they were brothers. They were both brothers who unfortunately both died. But we're not going to be focusing on the 2 Watkins brothers. We're going to be focusing on George William Newton, Reuben Beaumont, and Archibald Satch. So I said here they've got similar service numbers, and they've got and they served in the same regiment. So we can see here 15991, 15986, and 15987. Their service numbers are very close together. The inference there, they probably signed up together. They're serving in the same regiment, so we can probably infer, right, they were part of a POWs battalion. They were probably all mates from Purfleet who signed up to fight in the Great War together, and unfortunately all died possibly in the same battle. We're not sure yet. We don't know when they died. We don't know any of that. So we need to find out that information. So we've got our 3 men that we're now going to focus on. George Newton, Reuben Beaumont and Archibald Satch. And I've made this table for you guys. So as I said at the start of the lesson, if you can print this off, that'd be brilliant. If you can't, no worries. I'll go on to the next slide and you can copy it down. We've got the 3 men we're going to focus on, so we can begin to find out the rest of the information we're going to need to write our biography. Because what we're going to do next lesson is you're going to plan a biography for Satch, Newton or Beaumont, and then eventually write it in the next lesson after that. So if you can, guys, have this table printed off. If you can't, pause the video now and copy this table down. But I want everyone to have this table in front of them as we're doing our information for the rest of the lesson, because it's going to be really, really important that we have this table. Okay, so as we said last lesson, a really useful source for telling us a lot of information about family, birthplace, birth date, etc. is a census. And just as a little reminder, I explained last lesson, but a census is a survey that's done by the government to find out information about people and their families and households. And it's really rich in the information. So I've got 4 different censuses here, and we're going to look at them together. Okay, so we've obviously got one census here. It's a bit difficult and hard to read. I'm not going to be cruel to you guys. I've written it up for you in a table, but I just want you to know we are using the original source. So we've got the census for 1911 for information about George William Newton. And in my head, I've got that question in my head, right? The inquiry question that we've got. I want to use this source to find out information about George William Newton's life. So I would look in the table, identify that we've got George William Newton here. You can see that his relationship to the head of family is son. We'll look at that afterwards. But for now, I just want to look at his age. So I can see that in 1911, he's 19. Now, my maths isn't great, so I would say always check it with a calculator anyway, even if your maths is great. We want to take away 19 from 1911, and that will take us to 1892. So straight away, we've worked out that he's born in 1892. We've got a birthday for him, which is obviously really crucial in writing a biography. We see that his marriage status is single, and considering this is 1911, and he went to war he would have gone to war around 1914, 1915, we can assume possibly that when he went to war, he wasn't married, he didn't have children, as they're not listed here. And we can see that his profession is a labourer in chalk. So a labourer is a worker, and he works in the chalk industry. So there was a chalk quarry, which is like a chalk mine in Purfleet. So he likely worked in there, right? He was a labourer in the chalk industry in Purfleet. And we can see that his birthplace is in Hornchurch. If you don't know where that is, it's very close to us in Averley in Purfleet. Yeah, so he was born very local, not in Purfleet, but at some point did move to Purfleet. And then I can see, looking at his family, that his father is John Newton, his mother is Maria, and he's got three sisters, Ethel, Harriet, and Elsie. So I can add that then to my table, right? I've got his year of birth, 1982, his place of birth, Hornchurch, that he's got a father called John, a mother called Maria, and three sisters. He's a labourer in the chalk quarry, and he lives at 2 Botany Terrace. Sorry, guys, I should have pointed that out. And then at the end, bottom here, we've got the postal address, which is 2 Botany Terrace in Purfleet, Essex, which still exists today. We've got 2 Botany Terrace in Purfleet, Essex. So I hope that's quite straightforward and how I've used that information now. Now what I want you to do, guys, is exactly what I did there, okay? Just as a reminder, all I did there was look at that source. Sorry, that's the wrong one. I looked at that source and then just took that information and copied it down into my table. So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you 5 minutes now. For the challenge task, I just want you to use the census information on Beaumont. The census information on Beaumont is the 1911 census. You know, it's very similar to this. But the 1911 census for Satch doesn't have all the information we need. Therefore, your extra challenge, if you're going to go for that, is to use an older census, the 1891 census. Now, you need to use 2 censuses here, cross-reference them with each other to get all of the information that you need. So, guys, I'm going to give you maybe a bit more than 5 minutes if you need it. I've said 5 minutes here. Maybe that's a bit of wishful thinking there. But I think you could probably get it done in about 5 minutes, especially if you're just doing a challenge task. You can definitely get it done in 5 minutes. Extra challenge might take you a couple of minutes if you're thinking about it properly. But you need to cross-reference those sources. That's really important for that extra challenge task, okay? So just to say you've got 5 minutes, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the slides now. We've got 3 slides. The first one is for Beaumont for the 1911 census. So you're going to use that if you're using the challenge. And then I'm going to show the other 2 slides for the Satch task. If you can, just use the PowerPoint that I've uploaded. That's probably easier. If not, just wait and you'll see me going through the slides. Okay, guys, so hopefully you should have done all that now. If you did the challenge task, you'd get all of that information for Beaumont here. Should have got that he was born in 1890, born in Purfleet. That's information about his family there, that he's worked in the similar job to Newton, is listed as similar job, that he's a labourer in the short quarry. And then for Satch, if we were to compare the two censuses there, so we had the 1911 census, that didn't give any information about his family, so we had to go a bit further back, and we found out information about his family, and we also found out that he has a nickname, which is Archie, which is short for Archibald, obviously. And we can see, obviously, that he's a cellarman at the Royal Hotel in Purfleet, which still exists today. So now we're going to look at memorial and gravesite information, and I'm going to look at the source for Newton first for all. And this is obviously going to tell us the information that we're missing on our table so far about the date of death, when they died, where they died, etc. Okay, so I'm going to do this information for Newton first of all, and I can see on my table that we're missing that we want to find out when they died, how old they were died, and where they're buried. So these are two sources for Newton. This is a bit trickier than census information, but I'm just going to go through it. And obviously, we're going to look at the one on the left here. So I'm going to look at the table here. I can see name and initial. So I'm thinking right away, that's a good start to find out our man that we want. Newton. Here we go. Newton. Okay, I know that's correct. G, so maybe a George there, it's probably right. And then we've got that he's in the 1st Battalion Essex Regiment. We know it's true. So we've got our man here, and we can say that his date of death is 6/8. So what this means is the 6th month, or the 6th, on the 6th of the 8th, sorry. So not the 6th month, the 8th month. We know the 8th month is August. So he dies on the 6th of August. And we don't have a cause of death here, but it's likely where the other men have died that he's KIA. You might have heard that before from video games, to be honest, but it means killed in action. So he dies in action. And we've got to cross-reference and check that. We've got his regiment number there, which is 153991, which we know is correct. So we know that he dies on the 6th of the 8th, 1915, and he is in 12 Tree Corpse Cemetery. So, 12 Tree Corpse Cemetery. And maybe this information on the right will give us a bit more information. George W. Newton. So again, we've just got 15991. That's correct. We're G.W. Newton. So I'm just checking, cross-referencing it here. I can see all that information is correct. You can see again, 12 Tree Corps, Gallipoli. So we learnt a bit about Gallipoli last session. We saw there was a campaign of the 1st Essex Regiment where many died, which was in Gallipoli in Turkey. So right away, I can see that he's buried in 12 Tree Corps Cemetery in Gallipoli in Turkey, that he dies on the 6th of August, 1915. And I've checked that that information is right because it's got the name right, his rank right, his regiment number right, the name of the regiment as well. So all this information sounds like it's correct to me because I've cross-referenced that. I've made sure that it's correct. So I can fill that information in right, and I've added that information for. So I've filled all that in now. I've checked that that information's right. I've seen that he's died on the 6th of August 1915. He dies when he's 25. I worked that out by, looking at the birthday, looking at the death date, adding that up, subtracting that, whatever. So I can see that he dies on the 6th of August 1915. He's 25 when he dies, and he's buried in 12 Tree Corps Cemetery, Gallipoli, Turkey. We can make the inference there that he probably died in Gallipoli, some sort of the Gallipoli campaign. And we know from last lesson as well, we're going to be touching on this, we know that many men from the 1st Essex died on the 6th of August or around that sort of time in Gallipoli, in the Gallipoli campaign. So now, guys, I want you to repeat that task for Newton and Satch. Just doing exactly what you did for the census information. Again, say about 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes now. Pause the information on each one. And your extra challenge here is thinking about many thousands of men are buried at the memorials with many records and much information collected. What information could this cause for source usefulness? So thinking about this, after the war, many men were obviously dead, buried, lots of information to trawl through. What sort of issues could that create for source usefulness? Thinking about it, right? If data collectors, they're collecting all this information, they've got this massive job to do, how could that affect maybe the reliability or the usefulness of the sources? So, so again, I'm going to go through the slides. You can pause through on each one or use the PowerPoint on Show My Homework. Okay, guys, so you should have filled in all that information now. We know now that all of the men died on the 6th of August and all of the men were died in Gallipoli. Satch is obviously buried in Hell's Memorial in Gallipoli, and Newton and Beaumont are buried in 12 Tree Court Cemetery in Gallipoli. In the same, relatively the same place. Different memorials, different cemeteries, relatively the same place. All relatively similar ages when they died as well. They're all young men in their 20s and all unfortunately died on the 6th of August 1915. So straight away, guys, you should be thinking the inference you can make from that is they probably all died in very similar ways in the similar campaign, maybe in a similar proximity. And we're going to be, again, like I said, what we're going to do now is just cross-reference our information, and then we're going to come on to thinking about, well, we know when they died, where they died, but we don't know exactly how they died. We don't have information that tells us personally how each of those men individually died. We're going to be coming on to that. But next, what I want you to do now, guys, is this is pension records for the 3 different men. So we've got Satch, Newton, and Beaumont here. Now, these pension records were sent to family members after soldiers were dead, and it was a compensation really for those family members, because the men in the army were obviously paid, but then if they died, they're not going to get their money, so it's been sent to their family members. And this won't tell us any new information necessarily. It's really, really important. We've been doing it as we go through. It's really important to use different sources, like I said, to cross-reference our claims to make sure the information we're using is useful, okay? So, using these pension records, return to your table and check all the information that we have. So we've got here, oh, sorry, wrong one. We've got our table here. You should have that whole table, lovely table, all filled out now. I want you to use these 3 pension records to check and clarify that information. For example, straight away, if I look at Newton, I can see date of death, 6th of August 1915, presumed dead. We can make the inference there. They probably didn't find his body, but I can check that, make sure that's right. Did he die on the 6th of August? We know he died on the 6th of August. So straight away, we've got 2 sources that are saying that he died on the 6th of August. And that's going to make our biography historically sound. Okay, so take 5 minutes now, guys. Just work through these pensions. Clarify and check any information that you have. Correct any information that you have. Just correct and make sure, or you shouldn't be correcting at this stage. You should be making sure, cross-referencing, making sure that all your information is 100% correct. Okay, guys, so like I was saying now, we are going to look at, we're going to return. Okay, guys, so now we're going to return to something from last lesson, which was that secondary source on the local historian. So you should have read this, you should be aware of this, but this is a short history of the 1st Essex in Gallipoli. And this is a record from the 6th of August 1915, the day that we know all 3 men died. So we know that all 3 men died on the same day in a close location to each other, but we don't have any sources telling us exactly how each one of them died individually. As historians, we therefore need to make judgments on generalized information. Let's return to the source on the 1st Essex, okay? So even though we don't have individual sources, we can make, you know, a pretty sure judgment based on military records and work from a historian to tell us exactly what, you know, happened to these men. So I want you to, in your own words, summarize how likely, in your own words, summarize how you think the three men most likely died. And I've got 2 sentence starters for you here. We don't know how they individually died, and on the 6th of August, etc. So read that information. You should be aware of this already. We've read it last lesson. But you're going to, in your own words, summarize how you think the three men likely died. So just take a few minutes now, guys. In your own words, summarize how you think the three men most likely died. And you can use the sentence starters there. Okay, guys, so you should have taken a couple of minutes there. And I wanted you to get something similar to, you know, we don't know how they individually died, but a local historian source tells us that on the first Essex, on the 6th of August, many of the men died. Therefore, it's likely that the three men died going over the top because of poor leadership, okay? We can see that there, that many died on this day because of poor leadership. They were going over the top. They were trying to capture an enemy trench. And that's a really important thing to take away, guys. Even though you might not have an individual source telling you exactly how someone died or an exact piece of information, we have to make generalizations in history to be able to make claims about the past. So we've got our last task here now, guys. This is going to take you about 7 minutes, but you're going to explain in 4 to 6 lines how you research a soldier from your local area. So I want you to explain how to research a soldier from your local area. And it's really important here you upload this to show your homework, submit it as a comment to your teacher, or take a picture of your work. So I've got some helpful words and phrases for you, some sentence starters, a clear success criteria here. I want 4 to 6 lines, used at least some of these helpful words, talked about different skills such as inferences, usefulness, and cross-referencing. Okay, I want you to take 7 minutes and you're going to answer that question. How can you research a soldier from your local area? If you're struggling and want a writing frame, I've also made a writing frame on the next slide. But this is the end of the lesson. Otherwise, from that, you just need to do that last task now and then submit that, please. So yeah, thank you guys for watching the second lesson. I hope you found it at least a bit enjoyable. We've got 2 more lessons left in this inquiry. The next lesson will be planning our biography, and the lesson after that will be writing our biography. But make sure you get this work now completed and submitted on Show My Homework, and then go on to the next slide if you need it for the writing frame. Thank you.